Welcome into the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM, the king of sportsbooks. Brendan Glasheen in the host chair, back with Billy Ward and Sean Zerillo. 1 week hiatus, and the UFC is back. Time for best bets around the UFC. Looking at the card for UFC Vegas 91 at the UFC Apex in Las Vegas. All right, gentlemen, after a week off, we get, from what I've gathered, is a difficult card to swallow, but hey, it's part of the deal. It's on the schedule. We show up and we do our jobs, right? That's the idea. So let's dive right in, shall we? The main event, Matheus Nicolau takes on Alex Perez. Perez, the dog, at plus 150. Nicolau at minus 180. Sean Zerillo, you do have thoughts on this fight, more so than an edge or a comfortable side that you're on. So assess the fight for us and then try to nibble down as to what you might want to bet for the fight.
Yeah, I have a pretty good track record betting these main events, and I've had a difficult time narrowing down my definitive take on this fight. I've gone back and forth a lot, and I feel like sometimes the more thoughts I have on a fight, the less definitive betting take I do have, and it means because I could see it playing out in a variety of ways. Now, I ultimately settled on the value sides being Alex Perez at plus 150 or better, and the fight to go to a decision at about plus 140 currently. But I do need to see weigh-ins, and you kind of always need to see weigh-ins for Alex Perez fights. He's absolutely draining himself to cut to 125, but he's too small to go up to 135. So need to see how he looks on the scales. He's also taking this fight on short notice. I believe in place of Tigger Ulanbekov, so taking a 5-round fight on short notice. Weight cutting, always a difficult thing for him. But that said, you do like to see Alex Perez being active and being back in the cage and coming off of a 3-round fight where he was extremely competitive and probably a couple of punches landed in the third round or a little bit more activity in the third round away from beating Muhammad Mokaev. He's had 13 canceled fights since 2019. So it's good to see Perez in the octagon, good to see him fighting, good to see him going all 15 minutes. Now, ultimately, the dynamics of this matchup, I do think kind of play out as a moderate pace striking match where Perez is going to be more on the front foot, applying pressure. Nicolau is going to be a little bit more comfortable off of the back foot looking to counter. I think Nicolau has the offensive submission grappling upside, but I think Perez is the better wrestler and he's going to be able to dictate where the fight takes place. So Perez can probably counter wrestle, keep this one standing, look to make it a close and competitive striking match, maybe look to get on top of Nicolau and consolidate position, but he's very vulnerable to submissions when he does try to grapple. Could absolutely get his neck tied up or get, flipped in a scramble here, and Nicolau can end on top if these two decide to grapple. So I don't see, particularly active striking, huge power from either guy. I think the biggest threat to finishing the fight is likely Nicolau via submission, but Nicolau in the same respect was just KO'd by Brandon Royval a few months ago. And you never know the kind of physical effects that that's going to have, especially in these lighter weight classes past the age of 30. Coming back off of a knockout loss, there may be declines in athleticism and even fractional differences in speed we talk about all the time in the lighter weight classes makes such a huge difference. So I lean to Perez as the value side just because he's not coming off of a knockout loss. He's coming off of a loss where he was extremely competitive, close to winning, and fought all 15 minutes. Nicolau coming off of the KO loss, not a particularly high-paced striker in general, which leads to the rounds more so being close and competitive. So I see this one going longer. I like the over 3.5 rounds at minus 125, over 4.5 at plus 115 that goes to decision at about plus 135 to plus 140. Men's flyweight fights go to decision about 54% of the time. So even taking away 12% or so for the Apex, you're still getting a projection about in line with where the market is currently, about that plus 135 number. And then, as I said, Perez and Perez by decision would be the way I would lean in terms of a side, but I think I'm going to stick with the totals on this matchup.
Billy Ward's got his luck ratings up, an abbreviated version, breaking down 2 fights, Billy. Again, that might speak to the card. But you do break down the Nicolau Perez fight, 2 top 10 fighters here. You do see some value on the Perez side. Is that the direction you're going to go in for this week?
Yeah, I've been kind of torn between 2 plays on this one. I like the Perez money line, which I'll get to in a second. I think as it stands now, I'm going to go with the Perez finish only market. pretty much the same price, which implies that both guys have roughly equal finishing equity here. I don't think that should be the case. Nicolau has some good power on the feet, doesn't tend to finish the fights. He only has 2 stoppages in his 7 UFC wins, where if you look at Perez, I believe he's finished 4 out of 6. But, and Sean brought it up, Nicolau has some submission grappling upside, but he doesn't really have a way to get this one to the ground. And I was really impressed by Perez's submission defense against Mohamed Mokaev. Mokaev has submitted almost everybody else he fought, and Perez held up really well in the grappling exchanges. He got taken down. That's going to happen against a guy like Mokaev. And you look at all of his losses, they're Pantoja, Figueiredo, Joseph Benavidez back in the day. Those are all champions. Mokaev, arguably a future champ at 125, super young, been really promising. This is kind of a step down for him based on the level of competition he's been fighting. I think he's got more finishing upside here. And I honestly think the bigger or the likelier way it happens is through ground and pound, because Perez could, land something 1 or 2 on the feet. And with a guy like Nicolau who's going to look for submissions off his back, that sometimes leaves you vulnerable to being hit, being finished on the ground. If this were a 3-round fight, I wouldn't feel as great about that. But given that we got 5 rounds to work with, I like that finish only. I wouldn't take Perez inside the distance straight up, because I'm actually with Sean that there's a decent chance it goes to a decision. But on these finish-only markets, you get your money back if it goes to a decision. So it's kind of a free roll, if it goes that way. I think Perez has the better finishing upside. Lasting all 3 rounds with the grappling of Mokaev kind of cemented that for me. Because if Mokaev doesn't submit you, I'm not super worried about Nicolau.
One other thing I want to mention, too, I don't believe either guy has 5-round experience. At least Nicolau doesn't. Perez might have a fight from earlier in his career where he went 5 rounds. But, normally going into these main events, at least one of the fighters has pretty sufficient 5-round experience, proven 5-round experience. That is why I'm a little bit skeptical to take the over here or the goes to decision, just because you don't know what either of them are going to look like in the 4th and 5th rounds, especially with Perez coming in on short notice. I mean, his cardio may completely collapse down the stretch here. So a little bit skeptical about taking the Perez money line or the, goes to decision here in the 5-round fight. But I do think Perez and the over are probably the value sides.
Okay, good stuff. Let's move on to the fight of the night, targeted by Zerillo and Billy, the women's flyweight. We have Karine Silva taking on Ariane Lipski. Silva is the favorite in this fight. Let's see what the current price is. -160, and Lipski, the underdog, around +135. Sean, when you break down this one, is there more confidence in a side here, or is there another angle to take on betting the fight?
So, but pretty similar feel to the main event in terms of have a lot of thoughts on this fight, but I'm not so sure if I'm going to bet it or if I'm going to bet it big. But if I do, I probably prefer the goes to decision to the underdog. And that's, again, like the main event, I lean to both the over and the underdog in this fight. But Karine Silva is a fighter I keep seeing people fade. I've bet against her a couple times. She just looks like a different fighter physically than she did in her regional days. And we could talk a lot about the post-USADA era of the UFC and what have you, but she just looks like a different athlete and a much better athlete, much stronger, much more filled out, and also showing better cardio later in her fights than she did earlier in her career. This is a fighter I used to look to try to bet against live after round 1 because she has good first rounds, and then her effectiveness tends to drop off. She seems to be able to maintain that now. So I lean towards Lipski basically just based on past optics and, past ways I probably would have bet their respective careers. I do think Lipski is constantly underrated. She's a very violent fighter. That said, this is still women's flyweight. Women's flyweight fights go to decision over 60% of the time. Again, you take off 12%, 15% adjusting for the apex cage versus a full-sized octagon. You're still getting this fight closer to 45 to 50% to go to a decision. So roughly +122 or so implied, and you can get as high as +170 or here on the fight to reach a decision and go all 15 minutes. So probably betting the GTD here. I expect this to be closer and more competitive than the money line suggests. I think it'll be a true coin flip fight. And they both have, finishing upside, certainly. I just think it ends up playing out competitive enough that it goes to the scorecard. So GTD for me in Lipski Silva, and that will probably not be the most fun spot.
So, Billy, opposite side here in terms of your breakdown of the main event, you see Silva being slightly undervalued. Why?
Well, partially that was because she was -145 or something when I wrote that, and it's now -160. I still like the Silva side. I think Sean makes a good point, though, that If this one's going to go long, it probably favors Lipski.
Mm.
And if it's a short fight with a finish, it probably favors Silva. So if you don't want to pay the juice, I kind of like Silva inside the distance. She's never won a decision in her career. She's had 21 pro fights, finished every one of her wins. So that, kind of paints a picture here. I don't think she has any like high level submission grappling experience, but if you watch her fight, she really reminds me of someone who does. She's selling out for submissions early. So far, she's gotten them in all of her fights, including one that she got a knockdown to get her there. I do worry about what happens if she doesn't get that submission because you're kind of losing rounds off your back. You're giving up position to get there, probably, tiring yourself out as well. So I worry a little bit about it. I think Sean's play, if you're going to do that, I mean, maybe you correlate it, you take the over and Lipski, you make, a parlay out of that. I just don't see it happening, though. I'm not that impressed by Lipski. Her last win over Casey O'Neill didn't really look right coming off an injury. I'm kind of sort of willing to discount that. Her win before that, split decision, doesn't really have like a signature win over a decent UFC level fighter on her record. Every time she's fought tougher competition, it doesn't go as well for her. Again, with the Casey O'Neill possible exception, but there's some reasons behind that. So still like the Karine Silva side. I think you can probably go inside the distance rather than pay the juice. Only other thing I wanted to point out, she has looked like a better athlete. Part of me wonders if, you get to the UFC, you make a big enough paycheck, you can do this as a full-time job. You're not also like a cashier at a convenience store somewhere. And she won a performance of the night bonus in her UFC debut. So 50 grand check plus a UFC check. If she still lives in Brazil, cost of living there, that can take you a long way. I think that's probably the likelier explanation here, but it is post USADA, so we got to consider that as well.
Yeah, I mean, these fighters, a lot of times, as you said, like working full-time jobs and can't afford nutritionists or, proper everything that they need, right? That's proper sports science to make them professional athletes and optimize their bodies. So yeah, I think that leads into it as well. You see fighters all the time mentioning how they're better versions of themselves because they no longer have to work a side job and can focus on training full time. And she seems to be improved significantly, both physically and her skill set, and could absolutely see her finishing Lipski. Lipski seems to be a bit of a glass cannon where she either finishes her opponents or folds under the pressure. But I don't know. She looks like a bit of a new revert, a bit of a renewed version of herself as well. So this should be a banger, and it seems to be one of the internet's or gambling Twitter's fights of the night. One of the most important fights from a gambling perspective, based on the flag planting I see on either side of this matchup.
Well, they both kind of do the thing, especially on the ground, where they just kind of decide that this fight's going to end soon, one way or the other, and it might be me that wins and it might be you, but like we're not going to be here for a long time. It's kind of feel like how they both treat the ground game. I just think Silva's submission game is much more developed there, and she could absolutely submission attempt herself into trouble, which we see. And I was just saying that about Nicolau. I could see a similar dynamic here. So I'm interested in that one. I do think a longer fight definitely benefits Lipski, though.
How do we evaluate this card, Sean, from an underdog perspective when you consider it's not as publicly saturated of a card that we saw a couple weeks ago?
So there's a couple of bigger dogs that Billy and I circled here. But a lot of fights are sitting around like minus 150 and plus 130. So not true pick'ems, but close enough relative to how MMA fights are handicapped, that there's not like, a lot of dogs sitting like plus 180 or plus 200. It's either like the plus 130s or the plus 300s or higher.
It's like it's like baseball this week for you, huh?
Yeah, a little bit more of the heavier favorites. And the baseball over the past week, we had a number of pick'em series, so it all fluctuates depending on the matchups. Yeah. But yeah, Marnic Mann at plus 280 for me is one that I had circled. Billy will talk about another one in a second, but this is just kind of a system play in terms of how Billy and I identify underdogs. This fight is lined at minus 220 to go to a decision. That's 69% implied. The average woman strawweight bout, 115-pound woman, goes to decision at a 66% rate. So in the apex, this is lined to go to a decision more frequently than the average strawweight bout. Yet you have a fighter, Marnic Mann, who's plus 280 to win on the money line here. And just by nature of the fact that it's going to go to a decision, go all 15 minutes, going to see the judges, this could be difficult to score. And you want to have an underdog ticket if it's going to see the judges. And I think this fight largely determines or is determinative based upon who gets on top for longer. I think both women are going to be trying to get on top, get top position. I think Souza does a little bit more with top position than Mann, but I think Mann is just as likely to get on top here. She's a little bit smaller, she's probably more of a natural atom weight or a fighter who could get down to 105 if the UFC had a 105-pound division. Whereas her opponent is cutting down from 125 to 115 for the first time. She'll be at a speed disadvantage, but should be a little stronger. So I think that's a lot of the line being baked in here is, the size differential between these two women. But I think Mann has the skill set to make this close and competitive. The line for it to go to decision obviously degrees. So taking the dog at plus 280 in a fight that is very likely to see the scorecards, and hopefully we get a wonky split decision.
Billy Ward, underdog for you?
Yeah, just to talk on the general concept for a second, I like a lot more of the long underdogs relative to their price better than like the plus 150s or so here. I think a lot of the close fights, you could lay the chalk on most of them and probably come out significantly ahead here. But some of these longer ones, it just feels like all you need is one of these and it's going to, pay off the other ones that you don't get. I think Mann is also a very good litmus test for what we were just talking about with, can you get to the UFC and make yourself into an actual athlete now that you get to train full time? Because she did not look that way in her debut or on the Contender Series when she got knocked out. And maybe, like she's training at a smaller gym, but maybe you get a little bit more money. You can bring in some training partners, travel a little bit. Like this will be a really good test of that. And neither woman has looked all that great in the UFC. So co-sign that one from Zerillo. I think you can honestly say it's a very low level fight. The other, lopsided line in a women's fight between Petrovic and Liang. Kind of similar deal here. Like Petrovic is a massive favorite, but she's 0-1 in the UFC and beating up a bunch of people we've never heard of in regional promotions. Kind of hard to justify that one.
But the difference, the difference in that fight, and I think it's very important. That fight is heavily juiced to end inside the distance, and I almost think it's like Liang in round 1 or Petrovic round 2, round 3. And just looking at the pure line, juiced to end inside the distance. The fight that we just talked about, right? Silva and Ariane Lipski. Lower weight class, but juice to end inside the distance. This is the one of the three that is heavily favored to go to a decision. So that's like kind of the immediate, thing that stands out, breaking down those three fights and comparing them.
Yeah, and to be clear, I didn't bet Liang, and I don't think she's all that great either, and probably doesn't win this one. But like, you could certainly make a case for it. The kind of long shot underdog I'm looking at though is Rani Yahya fighting Victor Henry. I've been not impressed by Victor Henry. I don't really understand seeing him as this massive of a favorite. And my first thought was like, yeah, but Yahya is 39 years old. Like, I don't like betting these older guys. Victor Henry's almost 37. He'll be 37 next month. It's not like there's a big, age discrepancy here. But what really stood out for me is Henry has been taken down in every one of his UFC fights. And Rani Yahya is a former ADCC world champion. Don't look up the year he won that world championship because it'll make you sad for this bet a little bit. It was quite some time ago, but he still has it in him, right? Like you don't forget how submissions work over time. You're just a little bit less strong or quick at him. You could absolutely take a long shot. It'll probably be my prop squad pick on Yahya by submission because I think he kind of has to do it. Definitely a worse striker. The way he grapples like a jiu-jitsu fighter, not an MMA fighter, where if he doesn't get a submission, he's probably losing the round. So I'm going to do a little sprinkle on that as well. But yeah, Henry's liable to get taken down, and Yahya's the guy who can capitalize on that. Both older, I don't see a huge athleticism disadvantage one way or the other. So kind of ugly, like Sean's pick as well. I think, you take a couple of these plus 300 or so underdogs, you'll probably get one of them and feel okay about it.
Yahya is also a pretty good wrestler for a BJJ guy. Like not all of these jiu-jitsu practitioners are particularly good wrestlers and they don't have a way to get the fight to the ground. Yahya is a good wrestler. And also something else I noticed when Henry gets up, he tends to give his back, and Yahya loves to lock in the body triangle and hold the back for the duration of the round. So all he needs is he doesn't even need a submission. Honestly, he just needs a couple back takes and just to hold the position for extended time. And yeah, great point on the age differential between the two. I should have mentioned it for the main event as well. Before I looked at the data, I thought Alex Perez was probably like 35 and Nicolau was like 30 or 29. Those guys are a year apart in terms of age. Like Perez looks older. Nicolau looks like the faster, younger athlete, but there's really no big differential in age there between the two. So just another point lending to the Perez side of Nicolau coming off of a knockout. They're pretty close in age. Like in their respective careers and on the timelines, the age curve is pretty similar. And the same thing with Yahya and Henry. Henry seems like the younger, more athletic guy, but, age comes for us all, and that athleticism could drop off a cliff at any moment. I think the athleticism is already gone for Rani Yahya. I think it just comes down to his technique and, fight IQ at this point, because he fights like a 39-year-old man. But yeah, Henry, not much younger.
Real quick on your
36.
point about the wrestling too. I think part of it is back in the day, the way these grappling competitions were scored has changed a lot, where you can't just sit down and wait for the guy to come into your guard. So a lot of the old school no-gi grapplers doing ADCC in 2006, when he won the last time, you kind of have to be a little bit better wrestler then. Where now the meta in grappling competitions, and we saw it with like Aljamain Sterling when he did that pro grappling match, you're allowed to just like sit down and complain about your opponent not engaging with you. Where ADCC back then, that would have been giving up points. You probably would have lost the match. It's a whole thing. So some of these older school guys, at least at one point, had the wrestling ability. Whether the athletic ability allows that to still work is one thing, but Henry's going to give opportunities to be taken down at the very least.
Sean, where do we see value this week in the prop market?
David Onama inside the distance at plus 225. I was going to play his knockout prop at plus 300, but I think he can actually get a guillotine here. He's going to probably land very hard on Jonathan Pearce at points. JSP is very hittable and tends to do the chicken dance like once per fight when he does get hit clean. But he's very good at pushing a pace, wrestling, and also when he gets hit clean, he's going to reactively wrestle and try to shoot reactive takedowns to try to break up that pressure. And when he does shoot, I think he will leave his neck out and potentially get guillotined by Onama, or he could just leave his neck out at any point because he tends to do so when he's wrestling and get guillotined. But beyond that, I think Onama can absolutely spark him in this fight. So knockout at plus 300, pretty interesting to me. I prefer the inside the distance at plus 225. And then just to, jump ahead of the prop that Billy's going to give out here, the Ryan Spann fight, the co-main event on the card with Bogdan Guskov. This fight's going to be a car crash, most likely. 18 of 21 wins for Spann in his career have been inside of 7 minutes. For Bogdan Guskov, 10 of his last 12 fights have ended inside of round 1. Spann, under 1.5. Same game parlay is minus 110. I think that's a pretty good price. The win in rounds 1 or round 2, minus 150, but the minus 110 on the inside the distance, not a huge discount compared to his money line, like minus 175, minus 180 versus minus 110. But literally, 18 of his 21 wins have been inside of 7 minutes and only one finish beyond that point. So if Spann wins, it's likely quickly. If Guskov loses, it's likely quickly. I even like Spann round 1 sub. I think that's how he gets it done ultimately. He should have a big grappling upside here. Billy going with a juicier way to play that fight, but I think that's the most likely outcome.
Billy, did you ever utilize the chicken dance in the ring?
Not intentionally. That usually means something has gone horribly awry, is usually why that happens. So I'm sure there's a clip out there somewhere that internet sleuths could dig up of me being less than conscious. But,
okay.
Let Brendan recover here.
No, I couldn't help but ask. What do you got for a prop this week, Billy?
Yeah, so my counterpoint to Zerillo here, and keep in mind
Please.
that I'm giving out like a 10-1 prop here, so don't come at me when this goes horribly wrong. Like, I know. But Sean, what if they don't finish each other right away? What if they don't? Because these are big, strong guys swinging for the fences, trying all kinds of crazy stuff. You're right. They usually finish each other early, but then sometimes they don't, and then there is nothing left in the gas tank. I just don't think we should be getting 10-1 on a 3-round fight to go to the decision like almost ever. I think it was like Derek Lewis a couple fights ago where it was the same thing where everyone's like, oh, no way this one goes to the judges. And of course, that's the one where he does. On a slightly more serious note, I do think Ryan Spann has hit the point in his career where he's realized that just trying to win performance bonuses isn't the way to go. And he needs to like try to win fights and win some minutes. And you saw it in his last fight against Anthony Smith. Lost a fairly close split decision, kind of just trying to use his length and outpoint him and beat him in the striking without taking too many risks, which is totally different than how Ryan Spann used to fight. Sometimes I wonder if, that contract gets to the point where the win bonus is worth more than the fight of the night bonus, or there's other issues there. We're reaching a little bit on that. We don't know that that's the case. Obviously, I'm not in contact with Ryan Spann about his game plan, but at 10-1 odds, guys, like there's a better than 10% chance that he tries to just pick up a win here. He just lost a decision to Anthony Smith. Now he's fighting Uzbeki Anthony Smith. Bogdan looks just like a slightly younger and less beat up Anthony Smith without the tattoos. It is hilarious. But that one went to a decision, and no one thought it was going to a decision. Sean's play is obviously like the far likelier, better thought out. I just think it's better than 10-1 that he takes the safe route. Should be more skilled. I'm not super impressed by Bogdan knocking out Zach Pauga. another guy off a recent series of The Ultimate Fighter that was just terrible. So, you got more skill. You're fighting a guy who's got some power. Maybe you play it safe, ride this one out, take the decision. And at 10-1 is worth a sprinkle.
All right. Very good. So a little back and forth on the same fight. Ryan Spann decision, 10-1 for Billy, his prop play. Hopefully the prop doesn't do the chicken dance, and it delivers. All right, let's wrap with best bets, final bets for this kind of card. Sean, what do you have?
Yeah, best bet. It's the one bet on this card I actually like. Dante Mays and Caio Machado to go to a decision at -140. There should be a lot of cage pushing in this fight. This is a heavyweight matchup. Machado is pretty durable, and he throws a lot of volume, but he doesn't seem to have particularly big power. And the way to beat Dante Mays comfortably is to out-grapple him, but he has the grappling upside in this fight. And I think he's likelier to be trying to land takedowns or cage pushing. He's been training with John Jones, so I think he's rounded out his game a little bit better, become a better overall fighter, but you just can't generally trust Dante Mays from a fight IQ perspective to pursue his likeliest path to victory. And I do think ultimately he's going to end up staring at Caio a little bit too much on the feet, and Caio is going to throw a little bit more volume and probably edge out a decision. So I considered betting Dante Mays here at even money, but that's basically where I projected it. I make this a 50-50 fight. I just project it closer to about -185, -190 to go all 15 minutes. So maybe I'll take a shot on Mays by decision, but I would just like this fight to reach a decision at -140, probably get a close and competitive split. That is Dante Mays' fault that he didn't do a little more and get the victory. But yeah, fight to reach a decision between Mays and Machado. And then, Billy's going to talk about Figlak in a second. I just have other ways of playing the fight. I just like later iterations. Figlak round 3 or decision, Figlak in over 1.5. But Billy's going to tell you why he likes Figlak to get his first UFC win and bounce back from a subpar debut.
I don't know if you guys remember a couple of weeks ago. I think Sean and I went against each other on both of these, and I'm not bringing this up to brag here, but I faded 2 fighters off the last season of The Ultimate Fighter, slight favorites against both their opponents. Both those opponents won. Those were the guys who won the last series of The Ultimate Fighter and actually looked decent. This is a guy who won a split decision in Austin Hubbard, I should say. Austin Hubbard won a split decision in the house to make it to the final, where he got choked out by Kurt Holobaugh in the second round. And Holobaugh has not been great since then either. He just lost a fight. So this is really just the system play of I am fading these guys off the recent series of The Ultimate Fighter at reasonable prices, as long as they will allow me to do so. Figlak coming in off a loss to Fares Ziam. I think Ziam's really good. I don't downgrade him too much from that. And he fought tough competition in Cage Warriors before that, so it's not like he was coming in from nowhere. But again, this is a guy the UFC went out and intentionally signed based off his regional record, whereas Hubbard is a guy they said, oh man, we need 32 or however many warm bodies to fill out a series of this reality show. I guess this guy will do. And then he snuck into the finals with a split decision and got choked out by the eventual winner. So just looking at, for lack of a better term here, pedigree between these two guys and how we got to this moment, I think Figlak is a solid favorite. Wish I would have bet him at -150 or so earlier in the week. Totally fine with -175. All these guys off the recent season of The Ultimate Fighter aren't going to be with us in the promotion for too long.
All right, gents. Good stuff. We pulled through. That's going to do it for our UFC Vegas 91 betting preview here on the Action Network podcast. ESPN's carrying the main card. E2 has the prelims, and of course, ESPN Plus if you are a subscriber there. For Billy Ward, Sean Zerillo, find these guys also in the app if they add anything else to their cards for this weekend as it pertains to UFC. Also follow their baseball content. Billy's got the Nerfy Yerfy write-ups, and Zerillo, of course, is plugging away with baseball here as we enter the month of May. Be sure to download the free award-winning Action Network app to find everything there, as well as checking things out on the Action Network website, actionnetwork.com/MMA. Good spot for full breakdowns from the rest of the UFC staff. Best of luck this weekend, everybody, and we'll see you next time here on the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM.